It's a funny thing. Silence. You think it's all the same, just the absence of noise, but it's not. There's the easy silence you share with someone you've known forever, where you don't need to talk. Then there's the awkward silence on a bad date. And then there's this kind of silence, the one that had settled over our house for the past 24 hours. It was a humming, electric silence, thick with things I was too, or scared to even think, let alone say, and it all revolved around Robert. Robert. My brother, Liam, and his best friend, Robert, were a package deal for as long as I can remember. They were a unit. Liam, the loud, boisterous one, the engine of their friendship, and Robert, the anchor. He was quieter, steadier, with a kind of calm that just drew people in. Growing up, our house was their home base. The sound of them clattering up the stairs, the roar of their video, games from Liam's room, the smell of burnt pizza from their late-night cooking disasters. That was the soundtrack to my teenage years. Robert was so much a part of the furniture that sometimes I think my parents forgot he wasn't actually their son. He was just there, always. And I was just there, too. The younger brother, the quiet one, usually with my nose in a book or sketching in a notepad in the corner of the living room. I was part of the background scenery of their lives. I'd listen to their stories about school, about parties, about girls. I was the keeper of their secrets by proximity, absorbing everything but never really being part of it. They were the main event, and I was the audience. But now, Liam was gone. He'd left yesterday for a 2-week geology trip, some required thing for his university course. And for the first time in, well, ever, Robert was here, and Liam wasn't. My parents were also away, visiting my aunt on the other side of the country for her 50th birthday. Their trips had overlapped by a week, a perfect storm of logistics that left me and Robert alone in our rambling 2-story house. "You'll be okay, right?" Liam had asked, stuffing a final pair of hiking boots into his overflowing duffel bag. "Rob will be here. He'll make sure you don't burn the place down." He'd clapped Robert on the back, a loud, resounding thwack that was so typically Liam. Robert had just smiled that easy, slow smile of his. "Don't worry, man. We'll hold down the fort. Try not to fall off a cliff." And just like that, they were gone. Liam's beat-up car sputtering down the street, leaving a strange void in its wake. The first few hours were fine, normal, even. We ordered a pizza, watched some mindless action movie on TV, and talked about Liam's trip. It felt like any other night, just with one person missing from the equation. We fell into our usual roles. Robert, the surrogate older brother, making sure the doors were locked. Me, the quiet younger one, clearing away the pizza boxes. But when I woke up this morning, the silence was different. The house was too still. I came downstairs to find Robert already in the kitchen, a mug of coffee cradled in his hands, staring out the window at the gray, overcast sky. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his dark hair a mess from sleep. And in the quiet morning light, without Liam's loud energy bouncing off the walls, I saw him. I really saw him. It's not like I'd never noticed that Robert was handsome. You'd have to be blind not to. He had this classic, understated look, strong jaw, warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, broad shoulders from years of swimming. But he'd always been a safe kind of handsome. He was Liam's best friend. He was practically family. He was so completely off limits that my brain had just filed him under not applicable and moved it forward on. Looking at him now, though, standing so quietly in my kitchen, a strange jolt went through me. It was like seeing a familiar painting in a new frame and suddenly noticing all the details you'd missed before, the way the light caught the stubble on his jaw, the relaxed, solid set of his shoulders, the quiet concentration on his face as he watched a bird land on the fence. "Morning," he said, his voice a little rough with sleep. He turned from the window, and his eyes met mine. He smiled, and the kitchen suddenly felt warmer. "Coffee's fresh." "Thanks." I managed, my voice sounding unnaturally high to my own ears. I busied myself with getting a mug from the cupboard, my movements feeling clumsy and self-conscious. I could feel his eyes on me, not in a weird way, just in a casual, observant way, but my skin prickled. Every nerve ending felt like it was standing at attention. This was ridiculous. This was Robert, the guy who'd taught me how to ride a bike when Liam gave up in frustration. The guy who'd once driven an hour in the rain to bring me a textbook I'd forgotten for a final exam. He was just a friend, my brother's best friend. I needed to get a grip. We spent the day in a sort of slow, meandering orbit around each other. The house felt huge. and we drifted through it like two solitary planets. I tried to work on a freelance design project in my room, but I couldn't focus. My ears were tuned to the sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards as Robert walked down the hall, the soft thud of a book being placed on the coffee table, the low murmur of the TV. Around lunchtime, I ventured downstairs again. He was on the couch, feet up on the coffee table, reading. I paused in the doorway, watching him for a second. He was completely absorbed, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. He had this way of being completely present in whatever he was doing. When he was listening to you, he was really listening. When he was reading, the rest of the world just seemed to fall away, away. "What are you reading?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up, and his face broke into that familiar smile. It took him a second to pull himself out of the world of the book. "Oh, hey. It's just some thriller Liam left lying around. It's not bad, actually." He held up the cover. "You hungry?" I was thinking of making some sandwiches. "Yeah, sure. I can help." We went back into the kitchen, and this time the space felt smaller. We moved around each other, grabbing bread, cheese, a tomato from the fridge. Our arms brushed as we both reached for the mustard at the same time. "Sorry," we both said at once, and then laughed. It was a small, silly moment, but it sent another one of those jolts through me. His skin was warm. I could smell the faint, clean scent of persian, his soap. My heart did a stupid little flip in my chest, and I immediately turned away, focusing with intense concentration on slicing the tomato as if it were a delicate surgical procedure. "You're quiet today," Robert said, his voice gentle. He was leaning against the counter, watching me. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the cutting board. "Just tired, I guess." It was a lame excuse, but it was all I could come up with. How could I possibly explain the weird, chaotic mess of thoughts that was tumbling around in my head? "Sorry, I'm not talking much because I just realized I might be hopelessly attracted to you, my brother's best friend, and it's freaking me out." "Yeah, that would go over well." "Fair enough," he said, and thankfully, he let it drop. We ate our sandwiches at the kitchen table, the silence stretching between us again. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just the humming, electric silence of my own anxiety anymore. It felt shared. I risked a glance at him. He was looking at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. He wasn't smiling, just looking. It was an intense gaze, and I felt like he could see right through me, right into the panicked mess of my thoughts. I felt my cheeks heat up, and I quickly looked down at my plate, my heart pounding against my ribs. What was that look? Was I imagining it? I had to be. This was just me, projecting my own weird feelings onto him. He was probably just thinking about how awkward I was being. He was probably bored out of his mind, stuck here with his best friend's weird little brother. The afternoon crawled by. A light rain began to fall, tapping a soft, rhythmic beat against the window panes. It only added to the feeling that we were sealed in this house together, in our own little world. Robert put on some music, some indie band with a mellow, atmospheric sound that filled the quiet spaces in the house. He went back to his book, and I went back to pretending to work. But the entire time, I was acutely aware of him, just one room away. I was aware of his presence in a way I'd never been before. It was a constant, low-level thrum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I thought back over the years. I'd always admired him, looked up to him. He was everything Liam and I weren't. He was calm where we were chaotic. He was thoughtful where we were impulsive. He had a quiet confidence that I, with my perpetual social anxiety, envied more than anything. He never tried to be the center of attention, but he always seemed to be at the center of things anyway. People were just drawn to him. And I remembered small moments, little acts of kindness that I'd packed away without a second thought at the time. The time I'd been trying to build a complicated model for a school project, getting more and more frustrated until I was ready to throw it against the wall. Liam had laughed at me, but Robert had sat down with me, patiently, for 2 hours, helping me figure out the instructions until it was done. Or the time I'd had my heart broken for the first time by a girl who'd barely known I existed. I'd been moping in my room, and Robert had knocked on the door. He didn't say much. He just handed me a tub of ice cream and said, "This usually helps." We'd sat there and eaten it, not talking, and somehow I'd felt better. Were those just the actions of a kind person, a good friend? Or had I been misreading them all along? Was it possible that there was something more there, something I'd been too young or too oblivious to see? No, that was crazy, wishful thinking. I was just lonely and cooped up, and my brain was playing tricks on me. For dinner, we decided to make pasta. It felt like a safe, domestic activity. I was put on garlic chopping duty. Robert was handling the sauce. The kitchen was filled with the warm, savory smells of garlic and onions and herbs. The music was still playing softly in the background. For a little while, it almost felt normal. We talked about the movie from last night, about a class he was taking, about my design work. The conversation flowed easily, and I started to relax. Maybe I had just been in my own head all day. Maybe everything was fine. "You know," he said, stirring the sauce, his back to me. "Liam told me you've been doing really well with your design stuff. He showed me that logo you did for that local cafe. It's really good." I was surprised. Liam almost never mentioned my work to him. It was just art stuff. "Oh, thanks," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time all day. "He told you that?" Robert turned around, leaning against the counter again. He had a smudge of tomato sauce on his cheek. "Yeah, man. He's really proud of you. He just sucks at showing it." And there it was again. That look, that quiet, intense gaze that made me feel completely seen. He wasn't looking at me like I was just Liam's little brother. He was looking at me. My heart started doing that stupid, frantic beat again. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His brown eyes were so warm, so steady, and in their depths, I thought I saw something I'd never seen before, something that looked a lot like affection. Not the brotherly affection I was used to, something different, something softer. The timer for the pasta beeped, shattering the moment. Robert blinked, as if waking from a trance, and turned back to the stove. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking slightly. We ate dinner on the couch this time, watching some documentary about deep-sea creatures. It was a neutral topic, something we could both comment on without straying into dangerous territory. "Can you imagine being that deep in the ocean?" he'd say. "It's like another planet." And I'd agree, but even as we talked about anglerfish and giant squid, I was hyper-aware of the space between us on the couch. It was only a foot or so, but it felt like a canyon and a single, charged inch all at the same time. I was so conscious of his leg next to mine, of the warmth radiating from him, I kept my hands clenched in my lap, terrified I might do something stupid, like accidentally brush my hand against his. After we cleaned up the dinner dishes, a comfortable quiet settled between us again. The rain had stopped. He was scrolling through his phone, and I was sketching in my notepad, trying to distract myself. I was drawing the pattern of the rain on the window pane from memory. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice making me jump. I hadn't realized he was looking. Instinctively, I closed the notepad. "Oh, nothing. Just doodling." "Can I see?" He sounded genuinely curious. I hesitated. I rarely showed anyone my sketches. They felt too personal, like pages from a diary. But it was Robert, and for some reason, I couldn't say no to him. I slowly opened the pad and handed it to him. He took it carefully, as if it were something fragile. He started flipping through the pages, his expression serious and focused. He didn't rush. He looked at each sketch, a drawing of our dog, a portrait of Liam when he wasn't looking, detailed studies of hands, of leaves, of the way light fell across a chair. I felt completely exposed, my heart thumping in my ears. He was seeing a part of me that I kept hidden from almost everyone. He stopped on a page near the back. It was a quick, charcoal sketch I had done of him a few weeks ago. He'd been sitting on the back porch, reading, with the late afternoon sun lighting up his hair. It wasn't a perfect likeness, but I thought I'd captured something. The quiet intensity, the calm set of his shoulders. I had forgotten it was in there. A hot blush spread up my neck and across my face. This was too much. This was a confession in charcoal and paper. I waited for him to say something, to laugh or make a joke, or just hand it back with a polite, "That's nice." The silence stretched on for an eternity. He finally looked up from the notepad, his eyes meeting mine. He wasn't smiling. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were dark and serious. He held my gaze for a long, breathless moment. The air in the room felt thick again, charged with that same unspoken energy from the kitchen. It was no longer just me. I could feel it coming from him, too. The stillness was no longer calm. It was the heavy, loaded coming from him, too. The stillness was no longer calm. It was the heavy, loaded stillness that comes before a lightning strike. The calm before the storm. He slowly closed the notepad and placed it on the coffee table. He didn't hand it back to me. He just set it down, a final, deliberate action. "You're really talented," he said, his voice low and quiet. It sounded different than his normal voice. Rougher, deeper, deeper. "Thanks," I whispered, my throat feeling tight. He didn't look away, he just kept looking at me with that intense, searching gaze, and I knew, with a sudden, terrifying certainty, that something had shifted. The foundation of our easy, familiar relationship had cracked. The storm was coming, and I had no idea if I was ready for it. The seconds after he said, it stretched into an eternity. My words of thanks hung in the air between us, thin and useless. The world seemed to shrink down to the space on the couch, the air thick and humming. His eyes, fixed on mine, were like deep, dark wells, and I felt like I was falling into them. The easy, familiar lines of Robert's face looked different, carved into something more intense, more serious. The casual friend was gone, replaced by this man who was looking at me in a way no one ever had before. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. My brain was screaming at me to do something, to say something, to break the spell, laugh it off, make a joke, say you're tired, but I was paralyzed, pinned in place by the sheer weight of his gaze. He had seen the sketch. He had seen the truth. I'd hidden even from myself. And he hadn't run. He hadn't even flinched. He was still here, looking at me, and the silence in the room was no longer empty. It was full of questions, full of possibilities I'd never dared to entertain. Finally, with a slowness that felt deliberate, he broke eye contact, looking down at his hands, which were resting on his knees. The release was so sudden, I felt dizzy. I could breathe again, but the air I drew in felt different, charged. I should probably head up," he said. His voice was still low, that rougher, deeper version of itself. He didn't look at me as he spoke. He pushed himself up from the couch in one fluid motion. "It's getting late." "Yeah," I managed to squeak out, my throat dry. "Me too. Drow, me too." He paused at the bottom of the stairs, one hand on the newel post. I thought he was going to turn, to say something else, to finish the conversation that had started without a single word being spoken. But he just stood there for a moment, his back to me, a tall, solid silhouette in the dim light of the living room. Then, without looking back, he went upstairs. I listened to the soft thud of his footsteps, each one landing like a hammer blow on my frayed nerves. I heard his bedroom door click shut, and the finality of that sound was deafening. I stayed on the couch for a long time, my sketchbook still lying on the coffee table where he'd left it. I felt completely hollowed out, scooped clean of every thought except one. He knows. For the easy, comfortable bubble we'd been living in had popped. The ignorance that had allowed me to function normally around him was gone. He knew I saw him as more than my brother's friend, and the way he had looked at me, that wasn't pity. It wasn't disgust. It was something else. It was recognition. It was as if he'd been holding a secret too, and my stupid charcoal drawing had been the key that unlocked his own. Sleeping was impossible. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again, the intensity in his eyes, the way his voice dropped, the charged silence. I was terrified of the morning. How could we possibly face each other? How could we make breakfast and talk about the weather after that? The old silence in the house had been a comfortable blanket. This new silence was a taut wire, and I was afraid one wrong move would make it snap. When my alarm finally went off, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I stayed in my room for as long as I could, putting on clothes, brushing my teeth, doing anything to postpone the inevitable. Eventually, the need for coffee became too strong to ignore. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into icy water, and headed downstairs. He was already in the kitchen, just like yesterday, but everything was different. He wasn't casually staring out the window, he was methodically making toast. His movements precise and controlled. He looked up when I came in, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of the same nervousness I was feeling in his eyes before he masked it. "Morning," he said. His voice was back to normal, but it sounded forced, a little too cheerful, a little too cheerful. "Hey," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I avoided his eyes, focusing on the coffee machine as if it held the secrets to the universe. The simple act of scooping coffee grounds into a filter felt like a monumental task. My hands were trembling. We moved around each other in the kitchen with a strange, awkward choreography. We were careful not to touch, to even brush against each other. We gave each other a wide berth, as if we were two opposing magnets. The silence was back, but it was a brittle, fragile thing now. It wasn't the humming, electric silence of yesterday. It was the strained, painful silence of two people who desperately needed to talk but had no idea how to start. We ate our breakfast at opposite ends of the kitchen table, a vast expanse of wood between us. I stared into my cereal bowl, watching the flakes get soggy. I could feel him looking at me from time to time, but I didn't dare look up. What would I even see? What would he see in my face? The fear? The hope? The ridiculous, overwhelming crush that I could no longer deny? This couldn't go on. We had another 5 days of this, 5 days of this. Agonizing, tiptoeing silence. It was unsustainable. One of us had to say something. But what? What could I possibly say? So, that sketch, was that weird for you? Because it was super weird for me. Also, I think I'm in love with you. Pass the salt. After breakfast, we retreated to our separate corners of the house, like wounded soldiers. I went to my room and put on my headphones, blasting music so loud I couldn't think. He disappeared into the garage. I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of him working on something. Maybe Liam's old bike. We were actively avoiding each other, and the realization was a fresh wave of misery. I'd spent my whole life being comfortable around Robert, and in the space of one evening, I had somehow managed to ruin it all. Around noon, the guilt started to gnaw at me more than the anxiety. This wasn't fair to him. He was a guest in my house. He was supposed to be here to hold down the fort, not to be held hostage by my emotional baggage. I was being a terrible host and a worse friend. I had to pull myself together. I had to at least pretend to be normal. Taking another deep breath, I went downstairs and walked to the garage. The big door was open, letting in the cool, gray light of the day. Robert was leaning over the bike, a wrench in his hand, his back to me. He was wearing an old, oil-stained t-shirt, and his hair was sticking up in the back. He looked so focused, so capable. "Hey," I said from the doorway. He startled, dropping the wrench with a loud clatter. He straightened up and turned to me, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. "Hey, you scared me. Sorry. I wanted to apologize." The words came out in a rush. He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Apologize for what?" "For being so weird," I said, feeling my face flush. "This morning, and last night, I know I've been acting strange. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He tossed the rag onto a workbench. "You haven't made me uncomfortable," he said quietly. "I haven't?" "No." He took a step towards me, closing some of the distance between us. "Have I made you uncomfortable?" The question caught me off guard. It was a genuine question. He was worried he'd been the one to cross a line. The generosity of that thought, the fact that he was concerned about my feelings when my own were in such chaos, was almost too much. "No," I said, and it was the truth. Uncomfortable wasn't the right word. Terrified. Yes. Confused. Absolutely. But not uncomfortable. It's different with Liam not here. It was a weak deflection, but it was the only safe ground I could think of. He nodded slowly, accepting the excuse, even though I was pretty sure we both knew it was more than that. "Yeah, it is." He leaned back against the workbench, crossing his arms over his chest. It was a defensive posture, but his eyes were soft. "Look, about the sketchbook. I shouldn't have looked through it without asking properly. It felt like I was invading your privacy. "It's fine," I said quickly. "Really? It's just doodles." "They're not just doodles," he countered, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "That one of me, you caught me. I don't think anyone's ever really looked at me like that before."
My heart skipped a beat. Looked at you like what? I wanted to ask. Like you're the center of the universe? Like you're the most incredible person I've ever met? But I just stood there, mute.
"I think," he said, his voice dropping again, "we should probably talk about Liam. Wahimi." The name landed between us like a stone. The elephant in the room was finally being acknowledged. "What about him?" I asked, my voice tight. "He's my best friend," Robert said, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. "He's like a brother to me, and you're his brother. The last thing I would ever want to do is mess that up. For any of us." There it was, the warning, the boundary line being drawn in the sand, a wave of disappointment, so sharp and cold it was almost painful, washed over me. Of course, this was about his loyalty to Liam. It was always about Liam. I was just the complication, the potential problem that needed to be managed. "I wouldn't want to mess that up either," I said, my voice flat. I felt stupid. Stupid for hoping, for reading things into his glances, for thinking that sketchbook moment meant anything more than a fleeting curiosity. He must have heard the disappointment in my voice, because his expression softened even more. "That's not what I mean," he said quickly. He pushed himself off the workbench and took another step closer. Now he was only a few feet away. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I just mean, it's complicated. This is complicated. This is—" "What is this?" I dared to ask, the word barely a whisper. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as one of his rare signs of stress. "Us, here, alone. The way things feel." He looked at me, his gaze direct and unflinching. "I'm not imagining it, am I?" I shook my head, unable to speak. A fragile, terrifying bubble of hope began to inflate in my chest again. "Okay," he breathed out, a sigh of what sounded like relief. "Okay, so we're on the same page. Then, we both know this is something. Something," I repeated, the word tasting strange and new on my tongue. "And we both know it's complicated because of Liam," he continued, thinking it through out loud. "So we need to be careful." Careful. It wasn't a no. It wasn't a rejection. It was a recognition of the facts. It was an invitation to a conspiracy. We. He kept saying we, the two of us together in this complicated, new reality. The tension in my shoulders eased for the first time in 24 hours. The brittle silence had been broken, replaced by a tentative, fragile understanding. We hadn't solved anything, but we had named the beast, we had acknowledged its existence, and somehow, that was enough for now. For now. The rest of the day was a study in this new dynamic. The awkwardness was gone, but in its place was a constant, humming awareness. We made lunch together, and this time, when our hands brushed as I passed him a plate, neither of us pulled away immediately. It was a small, fleeting touch, but it felt like a brand. We talked more. We didn't talk about anything important, just books and music and stupid YouTube videos, but the conversation was layered with a new intimacy. Every laugh, every shared look, was part of a secret dialogue happening just beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, we were on the couch, watching a movie. It was some old black-and-white film Robert had picked, the kind I'd usually find boring. But I wasn't really watching the movie. I was watching him. I was watching the way he leaned forward during the tense parts, the way his lips curved into a slight smile at a clever line of dialogue. He had his arms stretched out along the back of the couch, his hand dangling just a few inches from my shoulder. I was so focused on the space between his hand and my shoulder that my entire body felt tight with anticipation. Every nerve was on fire. I could feel the warmth of his fingers, even though they weren't touching me. It was maddening. He had to know what he was doing. This casual posture couldn't possibly be accidental. Not anymore. He shifted slightly, and his fingers brushed against the fabric of my t-shirt, right on my shoulder. It was the lightest of touches, so light it could have been a trick of the air. But it wasn't. It was real. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare breathe. His fingers stayed there, resting gently on my shoulder. He didn't move his hand away. He didn't tense up. He just left it there, a quiet, simple point of contact that was sending shockwaves through my entire system. I slowly turned my head to look at him. He was already looking at me. His eyes weren't on the TV screen anymore. They were on me. The actor on the screen was delivering some dramatic, impassioned speech, but the sound was just a meaningless buzz in the background. The only thing that mattered was the weight of his fingers on my shoulder and the look in his eyes. It was the same look from last night, but this time there was no confusion in it. It was clear and direct. It was a question and an answer all in one. He had said we needed to be careful, but this wasn't careful. This was a deliberate step across the line we had drawn just a few hours earlier in the garage. The silence had shifted again. It was no longer brittle or strained. It was deep and profound, a pool of shared understanding. He had made the first move, a small, quiet gesture that felt bigger than any grand declaration. He had closed the gap, and now it was my turn to respond. The light touch of his fingers on my shoulder was like a lit fuse, and I could feel the spark racing all the way down my spine. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. The black and white movie played on, a ghost of sound and light in the periphery, but it didn't register. My entire universe was the worn fabric of the couch, the scent of his laundry detergent, and the solid, undeniable weight of his gaze. He was watching me. his expression open and vulnerable, waiting. This was it. The moment where careful went out the window. He had taken a risk, a small one, but it was a clear signal. He'd built a bridge across the chasm of unspoken things that had separated us, and now he was waiting to see if I would walk across it. My mind was a frantic whirlwind of Liam, of years of seeing Robert as an untouchable fixture in my life, of the sheer, terrifying possibility that what I wanted was actually within reach. For a second, I almost lost my nerve. The sensible part of my brain, the part that had kept me safe in my shell for years, was screaming at me to pull away, to laugh it off, pretend it was an accident, and retreat to the safety of the friendship we'd always known. It would be easier. It would be simpler. No complications, no potential heartbreak, no having to face my brother. But then I looked into his eyes, really looked, and I saw more than just a question. I saw the same vulnerability that was churning in my own stomach. I saw a hint of the same loneliness I often felt in a crowded room. He wasn't just my brother's cool, confident best friend in that moment. He was just Robert, a guy taking a chance, hoping not to be rejected, and in that shared vulnerability, I found a sliver of courage. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned into the touch. It was a tiny movement, barely a shift of my weight, but it was enough. I felt his fingers press down a little more firmly on my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it left me feeling lightheaded. I hadn't messed it up. I had met him halfway. He held my gaze for another long moment, a slow, unreadable smile playing on his lips. Then, as if he'd come to a decision, he slowly slid his hand from my shoulder, down my arm. His touch was warm and sure, tracing a path over my bicep, past my elbow, until his fingers found my hand, which was resting limply on the couch cushion between us. He didn't just grab it. He gently covered my hand with his palm settling over the back of my hand, his fingers resting in the gaps between mine. He didn't just grab it. He gently covered my hand with his palm settling. My breath hitched. My hand felt enormous, clumsy, and intensely sensitive, under his. I could feel the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, even though it was incredibly gentle. He laced his fingers through mine, a simple, perfect fit. It was the most natural, yet most revolutionary thing I had ever felt. We'd known each other our whole lives, but this was the first time we had ever touched like this. Not a friendly punch on the arm or a high five, but a deliberate, intimate connection. I finally remembered how to breathe, letting out a shaky exhale. I looked down at our joined hands, this impossible, wonderful thing resting on the dark gray fabric of the couch. His hand was larger than mine, enveloping it in a way that felt safe and incredibly exciting all at once. Enveloping it in a way that felt safe and incredibly exciting all at once. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice a low murmur, barely disturbing the quiet in the room. I looked up at him, and a real, genuine smile broke out on my face. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for the past 2 days finally evaporated, replaced by a warm, glowing certainty. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's okay." He smiled back, a real, unrestrained smile that reached his eyes and made the crinkles at the corners deepen. "Good," he said simply. We sat like that for the rest of the movie, our hands linked together. I have no idea what the film was about. My entire focus was on the feeling of his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand, sending little shivers up my arm. The silence between us was no longer tense or awkward or even charged. It was comfortable. It was a shared secret, a pact of mutual understanding. We had crossed a line, and the world on the other side was quieter, calmer, and infinitely more real. There was no going back now, and for the first time, I didn't want to. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. The TV screen went dark, plunging the living room into the dim, soft light of the late afternoon. The rain had started again, a gentle drumming against the windows that made the house feel like a secluded sanctuary, our own private world. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," Robert said into the quiet, his gaze fixed on our joined hands. The confession was so simple, so direct, it stole the air from my lungs. "You have?" I whispered. He nodded, finally looking up to meet my eyes. His expression was serious, his brow slightly furrowed. "Longer than I've probably been willing to admit to myself. I always thought it was impossible. Off limits. Off limits." "Because of Liam," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, because of Liam." He sighed, a heavy sound. "He's my best friend." The idea of doing anything that could hurt him or betray his trust, it's the worst thing I can imagine. A familiar pang of guilt hit me. Me too. But, he continued, tightening his grip on my hand, being here with you this week, without him, it's made me realize something. Lying to myself about this, pretending it doesn't exist, might be a different kind of betrayal. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to you. He paused, and his eyes searched mine. Assuming I'm not completely misreading this, and you feel... I let out a short, breathless laugh. You're not misreading this, I assured him. Not at all. I just thought I was the only one. I thought I was going crazy. You're not, he said, his voice soft. I guess we were both just really good at hiding it. It was strange, talking about it so openly. For years, my feelings for Robert had been a secret, shameful thing I kept locked away in the deepest part of myself. To bring them out into the light, to have him not only understand, but reciprocate them, felt like a dream. We talked for what felt like hours, as the light outside faded from gray to deep blue. We didn't solve the Liam problem. We both knew it was a massive, complicated hurdle waiting for us down the road. But for now, we put it aside. For now, it was just about us. For now, it was just about us. He told me about moments I'd never known about. Times he'd noticed me when I thought I was invisible. He mentioned a school concert years ago where I'd played a short, clumsy piano piece. Liam had been goofing off in the back with his friends, but Robert had watched the whole thing. He said he remembered being impressed by how brave I was to get up there. I remembered that night only for the sheer terror I'd felt and the mistakes I'd made. The thought that he had seen something else, something admirable, made my heart ache in the best possible way. I, in turn, found the courage to tell him things too. I told him how I'd always admired his quiet confidence, how his kindness had often been the one steady thing in the chaos of living with Liam. I even confessed that the sketch in my notepad wasn't the first one I'd drawn of him. A deep blush spread across my cheeks as I said it, but he just smiled, a soft, intimate smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. As we talked, we naturally shifted closer on the couch, the space between us disappearing completely, until our legs were pressed together from hip to knee. The initial, nerve-wracking thrill of our hands being joined had settled into a comfortable, warm reality. His arm was now fully around my shoulders, and I found myself leaning my head against his chest, listening to the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. It was the safest I had ever felt. Eventually, the conversation wound down, and we were left in a comfortable, shared silence. The house was dark now, except for a single lamp we'd turned on in the corner. The rain had softened to a light drizzle. I could have stayed there forever, tucked against his side, our hands intertwined. Robert shifted, and I lifted my head. He looked down at me, his face close to mine. His eyes searched my face in the dim light, as if memorizing it. He gently brought his free hand up to my cheek, his thumb stroking softly, just below my eye. His touch was feather-light, hesitant, as if he was asking for permission. I gave it to him by closing my eyes and leaning into his palm, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the moment the entire week had been building towards. The stillness, the shift, the crossing of a line, it all led to this. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, but I didn't move. I met him halfway, tilting my head up as he closed the final inch between us. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle press against mine. It wasn't a Hollywood kiss full of fire and passion. It was something better. It was tender and questioning, and full of all the years of unspoken feelings that had been simmering between us. It was a kiss that tasted like relief and homecoming. I brought my own hand up, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at the nape of his neck, and kissed him back. The initial gentleness gave way to a deeper certainty, a mutual confirmation of everything we had just admitted. It was a quiet, perfect moment, sealed off from the rest of the world by the rain and the dark, and the steady beating of our own hearts. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel his breath on my lips. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. We had crossed the line, not just with our hands, but completely and irrevocably. The stillness was gone, the storm had broken, and in its place was a quiet, beautiful calm. We didn't know what would happen tomorrow, or what we would say to Liam, but in that moment, none of it mattered. We had found each other in the silence, and for now, that was everything. I woke up slowly, drifting up from a deep and dreamless sleep. For a few blissful seconds, I was just a warm body in a soft bed, with the gentle morning light filtering through my curtains. Then, the memories of the previous night rushed in, and my eyes snapped open. The kiss, the conversation, his hand in mine, a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic shot through me. What if I had imagined it all? What if, in my lonely, hopeful state, my mind had just conjured the entire thing? I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was empty, the house was quiet. It was the same silence from the first day, the one that had felt so heavy and vast. I threw off the covers, my bare feet cold on the wood floor, and practically ran downstairs. I needed to see him. I needed proof that last night was real. I found him in the kitchen, standing by the counter, nursing a mug of coffee. He was wearing the same gray sweatpants from the first morning, but this time he had on one of Liam's old university hoodies. He looked up as I entered, and the nervous, frantic buzzing in my chest immediately stilled. He smiled. It wasn't the polite, friendly smile of my brother's best friend. It was a slow, private smile, one that was just for me. His eyes were warm and held the same memory of the night before that I was so desperately clinging to. It was real. All of it. "Morning," he said, his voice soft. I couldn't stop the grin that spread across my face. I felt giddy, ridiculously happy. "Hey," I replied, my voice full of a lightness I didn't know it could possess. I walked over to the coffee machine, and he moved with me, a natural, easy orbit. As I reached for a mug, he leaned in and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to my cheek. It was a simple, domestic gesture, but it felt more profound than the passionate embraces you see in movies. It was an affirmation. This is us now. This is our new normal. My skin tingled where his lips had been. "I was worried I dreamed you," I confessed in a quiet voice, finally looking him in the eye. "Finally," he chuckled, a low, warm sound. "I was worried you'd wake up with regrets." "No," I said, the word coming out with more force and certainty than I thought I was capable of. "No regrets." The days that followed were unlike any I had ever lived. It was as if the world had shifted on its axis and I had finally found my balance. The house, which had once felt so big and empty, was now our sanctuary, our bubble. The silence that returned was the best kind, a comfortable, easy quiet, where we could sit in the same room for hours, reading or drawing or just being, and feel completely connected. We talked constantly, filling in the gaps of the years we'd known each other, but never really known each other. I learned that his calm exterior was sometimes a cover for his own anxieties about the future, about disappointing his parents. He learned that my shyness wasn't because I was aloof, but because I was always afraid of saying the wrong thing. We were peeling back layers we'd kept hidden from the world, and the person I was finding underneath all of Robert's steadiness was even more wonderful than the one I had admired from afar. We cooked together, our bodies brushing past each other in the small kitchen, with a new, easy familiarity. We watched terrible reality TV shows and made fun of them, our laughter echoing in the quiet house. One afternoon, we found an old box of Liam's photo albums and sat on the floor, flipping through the glossy pages of our shared history. There were pictures of us as kids, Liam with a goofy, toothless grin, Robert looking serious and small, and me, a tiny, scrawny kid always lurking in the background. "Look at you," Robert said, pointing to a photo of me at about age 7, half hidden behind my mom's legs. "You always looked like you were trying to become invisible." "I was," I admitted. "It was easier than trying to compete with you two." He turned to me, his expression soft. "You never had to compete," he said. "I always saw you." And I believed him. The physical affection between us was new and tentative and thrilling. It was mostly small things, his hand finding mine as we sat on the couch, the way he'd rest his chin on my shoulder as I was sketching, an arm wrapped around my waist as we waited for the kettle to boil. Every touch was a reassurance, a confirmation that this incredible thing between us was real and solid. We hadn't crossed any more physical lines beyond that first perfect kiss. It was as if we both understood that the emotional connection we were building was too important to rush. The intimacy was in the talking, the sharing, the quiet moments of just being together. Our bubble felt so perfect, so complete, that it was a genuine shock when the outside world intruded. It happened on the 4th day. I was checking my phone when a text message lit up the screen. It was from Liam. "Hope you and Rob aren't burning the house down. Trip is amazing, but can't wait to be back in my own bed. See you in a couple days." Reading the words was like a punch to the gut. A couple days. The end of our time was no longer a vague concept in the future. It was a hard deadline, and his name, Our two names linked so casually in his message felt heavy with a new, complicated meaning. I must have gone pale, because Robert, who was sitting across the room, looked up with a concerned frown. "What is it?" I held up the phone, unable to speak. He got up and came over. Reading the message over my shoulder, I felt him sigh, a heavy, weary sound. He sat down next to me on the couch and took my hand, his thumb stroking the back of it in that soothing way he had. "I guess we have to talk about it," he said quietly. "What are we going to do, Rob?" I asked, my voice small. The joy of the past few days felt like it was draining away, replaced by a cold dread. "When he comes back, what happens to this?" "Nothing happens to this," he said firmly, giving my hand a squeeze. "This is real. It doesn't just disappear because Liam comes home." "But we can't just act like this in front of him," I argued, the panic rising in my throat. "We can't hold hands. We can't. He's going to know something is different." And what do we say? "Hey Liam, sorry to spring this on you, but while you were gone looking at rocks, your best friend and your little brother fell in love." Robert winced at my harsh, sarcastic summary. "It sounds bad when you put it like that." "How else am I supposed to put it?" I asked, my voice cracking. "He's going to hate us. He's going to think we did this behind his back to betray him." "It's not a betrayal," Robert said, his voice steady, even though I could see the worry in his own eyes. "It's not something we planned. It just happened. But you're right. He might not see it that way, at least not at first." We sat in silence for a long time, the difficult reality of our situation settling over us. The bubble had popped. We were back on Earth. "We have to tell him," Robert said finally. "We can't hide it. That would be a betrayal. He has to hear it from us, together." "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice a whisper. A whisper. "I know," he said, turning to face me fully. He put his other hand on my cheek, forcing me to look at him. "I'm scared too, terrified, but I'm more scared of losing this, of having to go back to pretending you're just Liam's little brother." He took a deep breath. "Whatever happens, whatever his reaction is, we face it together, as a team, okay?" I looked into his eyes, into their warm, steady depths, and I saw the truth of his words. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't running. He was standing here, ready to face the storm with me, and that gave me strength. I nodded. "Okay, together." Our last night alone was bittersweet. We made our favorite pasta. We put on the mellow indie music that had become the soundtrack to our week. But underlying everything was the awareness that it was all about to change. We didn't talk about Liam anymore. We had a plan. As loose as it was, tonight was just for us. Later, sitting on the couch in the dim light, I rested my head on his chest, listening to the familiar, comforting rhythm of his heart. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me," I said. "For this whole week. It's been the best week of my life." He tightened his arm around me, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "It's not over," he murmured into my hair. "It's just beginning. And now, it's morning. Liam comes home this afternoon. The house is clean, all evidence of our quiet revolution, tidied away. From the outside, everything looks exactly the same as when he left. But everything is different. I'm different." Robert is downstairs, making coffee. In a few moments, I'll go down and join him. We'll stand in the kitchen and share a quiet look, a silent promise. We'll have one last breakfast in our sanctuary, before the outside world comes knocking. I don't know what will happen in a few hours. I don't know if Liam will yell, or be disgusted, or if he'll eventually understand. The fear of it is a cold knot in my stomach. But as I stand here, at the top of the stairs, I know one thing for sure. I'm not the same person who was left behind a week ago. I'm not invisible anymore. And I'm not alone. I'm half of a team. And together, we're ready for what comes after.